Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're here today for the first, unfortunately, of the 2024 season reviews. We're looking at the interior defensive line today, and joining me for that is former defensive lineman Brandon Croxton. Brandon, how you doing?
Hey Ken, glad to be joining you. I wish it was a couple of weeks later, but it's always good to talk to you and talk Ravens.
Always a lot of fun, Brandon. Appreciate you coming on to do this. Um, the 2023 Ravens defensive line, remarkably healthy. Got through the entire season. Only 5 players ever took a snap for the Ravens, which is the number you typically activate in a week. So Urban, Washington, Pierce, Matabike, and Jones played every single snap for the team last year. Um,
hmm
they did not have that good fortune this year, but they still were, I would say, generally pretty healthy.
Yeah, I would say this is probably as good as you can expect. I mean, obviously 23, having all of them active and being able to play every game was, a real kind of almost aberration.
Mm-hmm.
Offensive and defensive linemen get beat up. They get ankles rolled on, knees rolled on, things like that that forced them to miss games. And so being able to play a full season completely healthy was really a blessing last year. This year they weren't as healthy, but they were still relatively healthy, and I think that um, is hopefully something that can continue into the future. But I think this was a successful year as far as health for all of them.
I would agree. I mean, they only had 85 total snaps from the 6th and 7th defensive linemen, who were Josh Tupou and Chris Wormley. So
Mhm.
Tupou had 56 and Wormley had 29 snaps. And those don't include penalties or kneels or spikes. And Wormley actually was in there for some of that. So it's
Mhm.
probably a little bit of an understatement relative to his thing, but it's also a very low total. You consider how
Mhm.
many defensive line snaps you have in a single season to have only 85 be above that. Oh, let's give you a percentage of the total snaps. That's an easier way to do it. So the total rush plus class plays 2,205. So only 85 of those, are about 4%, were for anybody but the big five here. Ravens played
Mhm.
2.26 defensive line snaps per play. That's up even from last year when they had 2.20, and it's about 45% of the snaps on average per player. And it's very unusual, Brandon, but you know this. The Ravens in the last few years have been known really for playing a lot of rush packages and race car packages where they're using it to
Mhm.
3 or 4 outside linebackers on the field. They really do not do that anymore.
Right, exactly. I think back when the Wink Martindale days and kind of those rosters, late 2010s to early 2020s, there's the strength with for pass rushing was more with the outside linebackers.
Mm-hmm.
Now a lot of the strength is through the interior. Matabike, even though his sack total was down a little bit, is one of the best interior pass rushers in the league. And Travis Jones really took a step up this year compared to last year, and is really a force that commands a double team every time he's on the field. So you want to get those two on the field as much as possible, and um, you and your outside pass rushers just it, are not better. That's not probably your best
Right.
for um, other than to have Owe and Van Noy, to have Robinson or rushing from the interior, or Jabo and moving Owe inside or something like that. That's really not your best four
Mm-hmm.
to pass rush. I mean, the best four is Matabike, Jones, Van Noy, and Owe, and
Mm-hmm.
get those other guys in subs and to give guys blows. But yeah, those four are the ones that you want to have.
We'll be talking about the outside linebackers on another show. So Van Noy and
Mhm.
Owe will be on that. But it's a good point that actually the Ravens this year did more moving even Jones, but more Matabike to the outside, which usually was a presage of some sort of a stunt or blitz was going to
Yeah.
occur.
Mhm.
But they moved those guys to the outside more than they moved some of the other guys inside. And that was
Mhm.
a little bit of an odd twist for the Ravens, but they definitely relied on what were at the season we thought three outstanding pass rushers. Michael Pierce didn't have a bad year as a pass rusher, certainly, but Jones and Matabike were the dominant pairing on pass rush downs. They're almost always in the game together, and they're very good.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think compared to last year, Clowney and Van Noy, to an certain extent, really kind of um, led the pass rush as far
Yeah,
as getting in there first for pressures. And this year it kind of flipped. Matabike and Jones were really the leaders in getting those initial pressures, and Van Noy and Owe were kind of the secondary ones, got cleanup sacks and things like that. But the pass rush was really kind of dominated from the interior this year, and it's an interesting flip, yeah,
yeah,
because you don't see
yeah.
that necessarily every year.
Yeah, and most teams, I would say, they are driven from the outside. There's only a few teams that have it. Even sometimes like the Steelers, who have a dominant inside and outside player, in Cam Hayward,
Hmm.
and they have a very talented group of three edge rushers. Um,
Hmm.
they're really more driven from the outside than the inside. It takes you to have an Aaron Donald or the Ravens situation of maybe Dexter Lawrence is with the Giants would be that same kind of an arrangement, but it does not happen very often. Um, Going into 2024, there wasn't any real doubt about who the Ravens' Big Five were going to be again. They were all re-signed by that time. It was a little surprising that all got done, but it did happen. Going into 2025, the Ravens may be looking for answers again. And one of the things that happened
Hmm.
on it was either on lock or clean out day, or it happened the day of the Bills playoff game, is Michael Pierce was getting his helmet signed by a lot of the other players, which is
Hmm.
not a good sign. I've heard this secondhand only. I have no firsthand report of this, or
Hmm.
no eyewitness report. Everyone's telling me second, or I guess it would be maybe even third hand, that this has occurred. But if
Hmm.
Michael Pierce is getting autographs, that's not something players do outside of maybe a jersey exchange. Uh,
Right. Yeah.
so if
Unfortunately, that might mean that he might have played his last game as a Raven. He might be considering retirement, or he may even know that the Ravens are planning to move on from him. Um, it's certainly possible. I haven't heard that report yet, but I think it's something to really monitor, because I mean, I think the Ravens, you know, should probably look to in the draft to draft at least a guy. But I mean, Pierce has been good enough as a run stuffer that, and he's not an expensive person on the cap, that I think he would be well worth the value to bring back next year. But if he maybe has decided to retire, obviously that's his choice.
yeah, so not great for the Ravens. He's carrying a lot of additional weight last year. This past year, really carried a lot more weight. It looked like he might have gained 20 or 25 pounds while he was
after
out.
he's after he got hurt. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was making the joke that his pregnancy is moving along very nicely.
I had a
He looked
different
ready to
different take
pop
on
by the end of the year. So,
it. He's,
but
he's,
yeah,
he's on maternity leave in 25. Yeah, that's good. I mean, my joke was that someone is going to pop out of his stomach and say, start the reactor, free Mars, because
hmm.
Quato came out of the guy's stomach in
Oh
Total
yeah,
Recall. So
yeah.
it's the reference is too obscure for the younger folks out there to
Oh
get.
yeah, I remember Total Recall though. I'm
Yeah.
I'm right at that age.
Uh, yeah. So unfortunately, I mean, I think he's still playing well enough that the Ravens probably would like to have him, unless Harbaugh has gotten to a point with his weight and said, we can't have this. We need to go in better condition. And I could understand that, I
Mhm.
guess. But what they had down the stretch once Pierce returned helped them win 5 straight games where they had always one of those big men on the field. Kind of surprising to me that they never at any time, well, one time, I think one snap or maybe a handful of snaps this year, did they ever try and get them both on the field at the same time? Like you
Right.
got a team that's running the ball effectively, like Buffalo, for example. why not put them both on the field at the same time? There are some goal line opportunities. There probably are maybe some 4th and 1 kind of opportunities where they might have both been on the field. But I'm talking about like on a regular 1-3 basis on a first and second down kind of situation where you know that your opponent's running the ball, maybe because they have the lead. They never did it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think part of the issue, Matabike has really been improved as a run stuffer. But I mean, if you could have Jones and Pierce, that's almost 700 pounds of beef right in the middle. That's a heck of a force to try to move in the run game. Yeah, I think you probably could do that and have Matabike on, maybe moving. I'm not sure if I mean, they played so much nickel that maybe that made it harder to do, but yeah, yeah. I mean, it's something that you could really kind of rethink a little bit.
I mean, one of the things you could do if you had a problem, they were eye dropperizing Oweh's snaps towards the end of the year, trying to do everything they could to keep him healthy, make sure that he was ready to rush the passer on the downs they needed him. Van Noy, they were a little bit more aggressive about having him out there on additional downs, even early downs, to do that. And mostly it was, when they were in the base defense, it was Robinson and Harrison on the at outside linebacker. And there was really no room in the end for Ojabo. Ojabo was getting a few paltry snaps otherwise that were, pretty clearly indicate to me he's not part of the Ravens' future. We'll see if he makes a team in year 4. There's
Right.
less and less of a reason each year for that to happen.
Right.
In terms of future seeing in the hourglass.
Right. Yeah.
Outstanding run defense as a whole from this. That's going to be a kind of a common thread theme as we go through the individual players here. But let's get right down to it and talk about let's call him by his right name, Nnamdi Madubuike, and the year he had in 24.
Yeah. So I think in a lot of ways he was a better player this year than he was last year. His improvement in the as a run defender was greatly improved. It has been improving throughout his career, but this year he's definitely been his best year as a run defender. And it didn't sacrifice his pass rush ability. His hurries and his pressure numbers remained steady, although his sacks went down. And like I think he finished with 6.5, and then he had another 2.5 in the playoff game. So, I mean, getting 9 sacks out of your interior defender is still a very good year. It's not the 13 that he had, but yeah, like I said earlier, he had a lot of cleanup sacks because of the pressure that Clowney was forcing last year. So losing Clowney, his sack total went down, but he drove a lot of pressures up the middle that allowed Van Noy and Oweh to get those cleanup sacks and get sacks. So as a team, you still were, you had 54 sacks. I think that was down a little bit from the previous year, but
61.
but I mean, that's still a very good number. They were second in the league in sacks, and sometimes it's a team. You're rushing as a team. You're rushing as a four units, or and so you can kind of have that fluctuation. But I think it was still a very good year and definitely a Pro Bowl worthy year for him again.
Yeah. A couple of things by numbers that were different. He was 3rd of 56 in pass rush productivity. That's a PFF stat that more heavily weights sacks. I think it might more heavily weight quarterback hits as well, over pressure. So there's a relativization in there. 3rd out of 56 guys who played at least 50% of the snaps. It's actually 50% of what the maximum snaps were. So it's a little bit differently defined, but I hate doing that every time. So I just say 50% of the snaps. And 15 of 48, he was in the 2024 rankings. So definitely a little bit of a drop. And it was mostly in a reduction in finishes, as you mentioned, and that's reflected in that pass rush productivity number. I'm not at all concerned about it. I was concerned that his pyramid of pressures didn't make a lot of sense. It was too vertical last year, too many finishes for the number of pressures he had. Now he's had a normal season. And if he were to continue at this kind of level for 3 more years on this contract, I think everybody would be real happy with it.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, you want to continue to have this type of a level of production. He's
yeah.
absolutely a Pro Bowl player. I mean, if he has 3 more years of this, I mean, you could argue that he could start making Ring of Honor
Yes.
for the Ravens with
I
this.
don't. If he had 3 more years like this, I think he'd be in because he'd have then played 8 years with the Ravens, and there's not all that many people who even ever play 8 years for the Ravens. But when you look at him and then you take out the Anthony Levines and the Malik Harrisons, if he's likely to get there, and other players who never really quite reached the pinnacle, like Jimmy Smith, who still might be considered, or Kelly Gregg in there, you realize that Nnamdi Madubuike is exactly the kind of guy the Ring of Honor was made for.
Hmm.
And I would suspect when he signed this contract, my initial thinking was if he plays anything like how he did in 23, 1 year out of the four, probably that he had a very good chance to be a Ring of Honor player. So anyway,
Yeah.
I think he'll make it. I did want to talk about his percentage of snaps, which is something I really leaned on heavily last year. I think we did the show together last year. You were reminding me. I was
Yeah.
kind of forgetting that it was you and me last year, but
Hmm.
I had complained and thought that maybe he would be more effective in fewer snaps. And then he had a big year in 20, actually, it might have been 2 years ago then. He had a big year in 23 in more snaps. And I
Hmm.
still thinking, well, maybe if he played 47%, they focused him on pass rusher or whatever, that he'd be more effective. Now he played 76.8% of the snaps, which I can't even begin to explain how high a total that is. Now, Cam Hayward probably plays that high a percentage, or Aaron Donald, but they're relied on within a 4-3 defense by their team to be the star player. It's extremely rare for a rotational team to have guys who play that often. If you go back and look at the Ravens' history, I did find that James Jones, who's a name from the forgotten past,
Oh,
who played for the
wow.
96 to 98 Ravens, once
Hmm.
played over 90 snaps in a game as a defensive lineman, which is incredible. Is the
Wow.
uh, he played 87.6% of the snaps in 1997 and 80.8% in 98. So that was those were the two highest that I found. I did not look all the
Okay.
way through. I only made it through to about 2001 by the time I had to check onto the call here.
Yeah, that is Iron Man territory right there for a
Yeah.
defensive lineman. I mean, to have that many battles against other 300-pound linemen, you are a true warrior.
Mhm.
I mean, and to do that for an entire season is pretty incredible. I mean, like you were saying, 77% of the snaps is a huge number for almost any defensive lineman. I think Christian Wilkins, I think randomly had a big snap total like that last year with the Dolphins before he got his big contract. He was up there, and actually, old Raven Zach Sealer also has a high percentage number like that. But I mean, those are rare birds right there,
Yeah, he
and
was he
to
was
get
actually fourth in the entire league in defensive interior snaps. Zach
uh,
Allen, Jalen Carter, there's another one, a guy who
well,
almost never comes
mhm,
off the field, and Kobe
mhm.
Turner. Is Kobe Turner a rookie?
He's a rookie, yeah, for the Rams.
Second year player.
Yeah.
Second year player.
Oh,
Okay.
he's second year. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
But even so, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a very young player who's already playing an
Hmm.
unbelievable number of snaps. So
Hmm.
uh, let's talk a little bit about his run defense if we can for a second. He'd had a big problem with missed tackles. That's something Madubuike had not been good at, but something really improved at it. He only had 3 missed tackles the whole season. His missed tackle rate was ninth among the IDL players, and that's ninth out of 56. And then this is a great number: 30 stops for 3 missed tackles. That's a very good relationship. And there are some other Ravens who did very well in that category, but if you look across the league, there are very few players that have a 10-to-1 ratio on the interior defensive line. At inside linebacker, a really great ratio started about 4.5 to 1.
Hmm.
But on the defensive line, you get more stops, and you better not miss tackles, or you won't be playing for too long.
Right. Absolutely. And a lot of those were on the third and short, fourth and short opportunities. He was
Mm-hmm.
very good in
That's a good point.
those when teams are just trying to run a dive or something inside to get a yard. Him and Jones really clogged those middles and made a lot of stops on the inside. So I mean, those are obviously huge plays. You're forcing teams to think about going for it on fourth down. You're forcing teams off the field because they get stopped on fourth
Mhm.
down on a 4th and 1 situation. Those are huge plays that often get overlooked. It's not, it's not sexy like a sack or an interception or anything, but those plays help you win games.
Pretty sexy to me, I'll say. I really appreciate those kind of plays. And Michael Pierce
Mhm.
had a bunch of them in 23 in particular. You're, with your background as a defensive lineman and now with the prevalence of the tush push and other, the Andrews dive play that they've,
Mhm.
put in the playbook now, obviously, and want to use as opposed to putting Lamar in that position. Are the remaining NFL teams just dinosaurs in terms of these slow developing running back handoffs? I mean, running back handoffs on dive plays were once thought to be these extremely fast developing plays, but it's also a case where you didn't have a guy deep in the in the eye or in a even a single back set. You really were, it's more like Larry Zonka doing those plays, and he would be more of a dive play, specifically from a guy who was much closer to the quarterback. And also, by the way, you go back to watch early 70s football, watch how tight those freaking formations are. The linebackers are 2 yards off the line of scrimmage. They're not 4 yards or 4.5 yards off. They're right there. I mean, it's almost like they're expecting a tush push on every play.
It is interesting to watch. And one of the things I notice so much is how spread out offensive linemen are
Mm-hmm.
in today's NFL. I mean, you see like a good 3 or 4 foot gap between the center and guard, or guard and tackle sometimes. And I mean, I wasn't the biggest guy in the world, but I look at those, I was like, man, if I could shoot that gap so well right there. But I mean, yeah, it's really become interesting how that play, the dive to the running back, which I'd never really loved in a 4th and 1 or
Mm-hmm.
uh, situation, because the running back has to run 7 or 8 yards to get one, because he starts 7 yards in the backfield. So if he's running in a straight line, he's running 7 or 8 yards to get one, as opposed to a quarterback or Mark Andrews or something like that, that's running 1 yard to get 1 yard
Mm-hmm.
essentially. So they found just basically kind of a way to be more efficient when you're running the ball. And it's more or less the same responsibility for an offensive line. You're just basically wedge blocking that play anyway. So
Mm-hmm.
I think you just found a more efficient way to get that 1 yard.
As a defensive player, I don't know how they taught it at Howard, but one thing I definitely have noticed from the old Ravens team is that they are consistently trying to submarine the offensive linemen and allow linebackers to make the play. So your goal is to get the offensive lineman on the ground, even though you would think that would open up space. It doesn't really, because the space is not at the feet of the running back.
That's
And yeah.
that's always I mean, defensive lineman, you're basically just asked, just dive at the ankles of the offensive lineman and just create a pile and let the linebacker either go around or go over the top to make the stop on the ball carrier. Yeah, that's been that's been the strategy for 30 years, I would say. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, 70s, 80s, and probably even into the 90s, I think this stopped at some point as people realized how short running back careers were. Um, Dive over the line plays were a big deal for running backs. So the guys who could really elevate, and
Hmm.
maybe LaDainian Tomlinson was in this category because he was a great athlete in a lot of ways, but Emmett Smith and
Hmm.
a lot of the smaller backs of the 70s, Terry Metcalf and guys like that who were fast. They just leapt right over the pile. A dive
Hmm.
play was truly a dive play, and then you might get
Hmm.
met by an inside linebacker at an unfortunate point in that situation.
Yeah, yeah. I think the iconic one is Walter Payton jumping over the
Yeah.
line, and yeah, yeah, and for a touchdown. Yeah, I do miss those plays. It's a heck of an iconic play, athletic play, because you see, I mean, a lot of times you can see a running back literally clear a path, jump clear over a pile of, you know 300-pound guys that are stacking up 6 feet in the air, and they're high jumping right over, and it's like, Good grief, those guys are incredible athletes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's we'll talk a little bit more about Matabiko. Jones and Matabiko almost always on the field together. Those are the two that the Ravens defensive line is going to have to be rebuilt around, and it's a retooling, I guess. Losing Michael Pierce is bad. They'll have to get a specific type of player to replace him, but it's also it's the kind of loss that you probably have in most units every year or every 2 years at the least, that you lose somebody of that kind of stature. I'm talking about in a 5-person unit, say. You don't get to keep your players forever. It's the unfortunate nature of football.
Right. Yeah. I remember last year we talked about the Ravens probably needed to start looking to get younger on the defensive line because, I mean, Pierce is 32, Urban's 33. Even Broderick Washington is, I think he's close to 30 if he's not 30. So you want to start to look to get younger. So I think that makes a draft, at least one draft pick on the defensive line to need. And I think you could probably find a suitable replacement for Michael Pierce in the open market. There's plenty of veteran nose tackle type of players, and the Ravens are always good at finding those kind of behemoths out there.
If you can do it cheap, then that's fine. But the Ravens are so strapped for cash right now. They don't have any money to spend on a free agent. And if they had, $5 million or something, I'd try and get Travis Jones re-signed a year early, or one of the players they have, because they have, Travis Jones and Likely and Owe and lots of others that they're going to lose some players, and they have an opportunity this year. Ardarius Washington, Daniel Fa'alele might be in this group that they can sign early and get a potentially significant divisible benefit from these guys, because no one wants to play out the fourth year of their 4-year deal, risk injury in that year, which is, by the way, exactly what happened to Brent Urban, and really slowed down any earnings he had in the game, because he had a great year in his fourth year and was ready to make some real money, and then and it didn't really work out for him. He never end up making a lot of money in the game, even though he's certainly been a survivor.
Right. Yeah. The risk always kind of transfers to the team when the player signs that big contract. So even though you may not necessarily maximize how much you would get on an open market, to take a sure, 85% as opposed to a 100%, but it's also a significant risk that you get nothing is, it's something, players have to really consider and think about.
Yeah. Most of that risk is injury risk, but in the case of Brandon Stevens, it wasn't just injury risk. He was healthy this year. He just didn't play well. And if he had signed after year 3, and honestly, thank goodness the Ravens didn't invest in him given the year he had, then it would be different. And then it has been absolutely the focus, I'd say, of Friday Morning GM the whole year is trying to figure out how they're going to approach or prioritize these end of year 3 signings. And they've got a couple that they can't defer. Linderbaum being a key one, because he won't have a 5th-year option that they can pick up because it'll be too expensive. So they probably means that they'll have to try and sign him this offseason as opposed to waiting.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on and talk about Michael Pierce a little bit. We've got, obviously, he's been mixed in some of these with the others. He dropped from 55.3% of the snaps in 2023 to 21.4% in 2024, so effectively about a 60% reduction in his playing time. If he retires, as we suspect may happen, the void years in his contract will be accelerated. There will be still a very small cap savings of $700,000, not nearly enough to replace Michael Pierce. So you probably cannot even get a first-year player from the draft or UDFA at that price now. If you can, it's maybe 700 and change. But the CBA is fairly generous even to rookies relative to that number.
Right, exactly. I think he has been very good at his role. He's been a great run stuffer. That's his primary responsibility. He worked a lot with Washington. It was kind of Matabike and Jones working as a team,
Yep.
and Pearson, Washington kind of working as the second team. And I think he's a heck of a run stuffer. I mean, being 360 pounds, and that might be conservative.
Yep.
You're not easy to move.
Do you think he might have been
It
playing
was-
over 400 pounds at the end of this year?
I think it's very possible.
Okay.
I remember a few years ago when he came into
Yep.
training camp severely overweight, and he like I think they were being conservative. And they said 380, and he was like, "No, he's over 400." I think he probably reached right around 400 when he
Okay.
came back. Yeah, yeah.
So completely agree with you in terms of the fine run defense they still got from him. They also, he's a guy you can't really block one-on-one in the passing game, that's a really
Mhm,
nice compliment
mhm.
for the snaps that Jones can't be on the field. So
Right.
you need that, and he was very good at that. But 4.3% missed tackle rate. I want to go down one other rabbit hole here, because I know a lot of people subscribe to PFF, and oftentimes you'll hear numbers quoted from there. If you look at the interior defensive linemen and look at the tackle grades, they are not centered like they have. And I talked to them about it. They said they were going to work on it. They were trying to find a reason, but I think they've had a missed tackle definition, which has gotten tougher, and they're using like a 3 or a 5 year look back to try and center their grades, so that they're grading them on a tougher standard. But if you look at it, like the average tackling grade is probably in the low 50s, and I think it was Matabike. His grade might have been like a 59 or something. I forget who I was looking at earlier today. I think it might have been Matabike, and it was ninth among all defensive linemen in terms of how good it was. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously something is wrong there. So don't be concerned about yellow or maybe even orange grades in some situations for
Hmm.
tackling for defensive linemen, because they don't have that scale centered up properly yet,
Right.
which means they're
Right. Yeah. And also just in general, when you're playing like a defensive lineman, it's not necessarily their responsibility to make the tackle.
sure.
Their responsibility is to either clog a hole or penetrate and to change the direction or slow the momentum of a running back. So sometimes, and you're doing that with a 300-pound person on, half your body. Your job isn't necessarily to make that tackle, even though obviously that's a bonus, but that's the linebacker to kind of come behind you and clean up basically the mess that the
You
defensive lineman
created.
made.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
And so yeah.
it's something I don't think everybody understands, but denying space is the term I use for it in the run game. Is you want to make sure that the running back has fewer choices and less good choices, and ideally no good choices. But if you
Right.
retract that running back in some way, that's often a good. I call that bubbling, when they take somebody and force them further to the outside. Usually creates
Hmm.
pursuit opportunities for the rest of the defense. On the
Yeah.
inside, it's usually a matter of squeezing a gap and
Yes.
trying to make it tighter. If you just penetrate, if all you do is push your offensive lineman forward, you'll mess up a whole bunch of things potentially. Sometimes pulls, sometimes you
Mhm.
bifurcate the backfield in a way that will force a running back to either go left or right when neither is really where he wants to go.
Right.
Um, so
Yeah.
all kinds of opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, a running back, a lot of the really good running backs are looking for cutback opportunities, and
Yep.
if you penetrate and you do something to force that running back to make that cutback a yard or two before they really want to, that really helps the entire team be able to track and get that running back down before a big play happens. So yeah.
All right. What else I want to say about Pierce in this end? He's kind of been an underrated pass rusher his whole career. He actually
Hmm.
had a pretty decent year in 2024. If you look at the guys who played 20% plus of the snaps, he was 11th in pass rush productivity by PFF. Now, he had 2 sacks. that's not the
Mhm.
contribution that's really driving it. It's a lot of pressures on a per pass rush snap, and Pierce did not have as many pass rush snaps because his profile shows for more early down plays. So I compared this for two players just to have it, but Washington, for example, only played 15.5% of his snaps on third down, but Matabike, on the other hand, played 26.7% of his snaps on third down. So there are less third downs in total to play. And I think we can all understand how there'd be, the most first, the second most seconds, the third most thirds, etc. But
Mhm.
the third down is definitely a highly concentrated specialist role, and players like Michael Pierce, where they used to be on the field earlier in his career, then is not a guy they have on now.
Yeah. No, and to add to his pass rushing success, like he's really good at doing stunts, like, and not
Mhm.
only being kind of the first guy that kind of up the middle. He can sometimes loop around and cover a couple of gaps, and I mean he moves. I mean, considering he is probably like 400 pounds or something, he that is an incredible athlete to move the way he does around. Yeah.
Yeah, the Ravens use stunts a lot. There was a time in Ravens history when they used them even more, and the name that came up earlier, James Jones, who was the real Iron Man on the defensive line in the first three Ravens seasons. Now, a lot of injuries
Hmm.
there. He had by far, I mean, not even close, by far the highest percentage of stunts per snap. Marvin Lewis loved him, but James Jones was good at him. And James Jones, if you look at his career, I mean, interesting player. Really had a lot of his success as a pass rusher. I've tried by the way, for a long time to try and get him on this show, but I cannot find contact information for him. I assume he's still alive, but I cannot find contact information for him.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Um,
Oh, we can't. We're not going to talk about the interception
oh no,
for
please.
Bears. I mean, yes, like John Harbaugh said, the most amazing play in the history of the NFL. Michael Pierce dropping into coverage and intercepting the Browns at the end of the game, and it looked like he swallowed that football. That football disappeared into his stomach when he caught
Yeah.
it, and he he took off. I thought he could have made it, but he decided to do a baseball slide and scare me because it looked like he was about to tear an ACL with that slide.
Yeah, it sure did. That looked absolutely terrible, the going down there. And then
Yeah.
and then the offensive lineman, Ifedi or whoever the left tackle was for the Browns, really didn't want the play to be over. He hit the football afterwards.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that football sometimes, wide receiver, whatever, will score a touchdown. They'll kind of throw the ball backwards, and they're going to recover the football, but he doesn't throw it into the stands. You know that.
Hmm.
He's probably going to get that football. Michael Pierce, that they will have to pry that football from his cold dead fingers at some
Oh,
point in the future. He's never going
he
to get
might
up.
have to be buried. He's probably going to be buried with that football.
That is a great
Yes.
that is a great idea, by the way. Somebody should be on there. And you know
Yeah.
what else I love about that is it's not like Michael Pierce has never dropped a cover with the Ravens. He's had a fair number of zone blitz coverage drops, and the Ravens often drop from the middle. They rush extras on both edges. That's one of their common tropes. But when he does that, oftentimes what he's doing is really just trying to keep an eye on the quarterback and making sure that they don't escape the pocket left or right. It's kind of like you set yourself up with two spies. He can be an extra guy that can diagnose an outlet pass and maybe try and help with the tackle that way. But he doesn't have really coverage responsibilities other than lane
Right.
blocking. He
Right.
knew exactly what to do on the play. I mean, he stepped right up. The ball was thrown behind the receiver. He stepped right up, right
Mhm.
into the football. It was as if he was ready to take it to the house, even though obviously he didn't. Then he swallows up the football in his body, and
Mhm.
thank goodness he held on. Thank goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, that it was a great. That's every defensive lineman's dream right there is to get an interception or something like that. And like one of my old coaches said, we would occasionally have a defensive tackle, and it's like to have you drop back, and he said, listen, you don't really have any responsibility. your responsibility is for the quarterback to look at you and go like, "What is he doing?" And then hopefully the pass rush gets
Confusion.
there. Yes, you're there to confuse them. That's all you're doing. Yeah. So,
All right. So Ravens have a great history with UDFAs. So it could be a UDFA they look at. I'd be really surprised if they didn't have that guy. But you know what? I gave so much of that credit because DaCosta was the head of small school scouting. I gave so much of it to Eric during the Ozzie years. And now since DaCosta has been the guy in charge, they really haven't had a whole lot of small school picks.
right, yeah, it's been an interesting. They really kind of go from the Power Five schools and
Mhm.
a huge amount, and I think part of it is probably with the NIL now.
Yes.
Like these smaller school guys are often transferring to the big schools in their junior and senior years anyway, so they might have started out in a small school, but then they kind of go to a big school to finish out their careers or draft position or whatever. Um, and yeah, I think also like probably the league probably caught up to them a little bit because you still see a fair amount of these smaller school guys get drafted probably, and they might have been overdrafted from what the Ravens feel is a good
Yeah.
value, and so they've probably a little market correction there, maybe a little.
Yeah, it could well be. There's definitely we've occasionally seen those guys. Brandon Williams was a small school guy, and they've definitely had some that. But Pierce was. It's now been 8 years, I think, since Pierce came into the league. I think it was 2016. So nine years he played in the league. So 8 years ago he was, or 9 years ago, I guess now he was undrafted. But then I think they basically knew right away what a nasty guy he was and how much they really wanted to keep him. I also wonder if the Ravens might this year be looking at the UDFA market for another fullback, whether that's
Right.
I mean, first of all, I'd be happy if I'd be okay if it was a guy who'd actually played fullback in college, maybe somebody who's played in the Ricard model already. But I'm also happy if
Mhm.
they just go out and do exactly what the Chargers did this last year and find a guy they like, who they think is a defensive lineman, athletic, not really draftable because of some shortcoming, but is a guy that they can put in a fullback role.
Right, actually, absolutely. Like you were saying, when you're stretched thin on cap dollars, you have to figure out ways to save. Ricard is one of the still one of the best fullbacks, and hopefully they could bring him back. But I mean, you have to figure out ways to save, and finding UDFA's and undrafted free agents is a great way to kind of replenish your roster and get cheaper at the same time.
They will have to do a lot of that. They have a lot of draft picks, by the way.
Mhm.
They can lock up some UDFA guys. If there's an Ardarius Washington out there this year or a Keaton Mitchell that they really like, they can lock him up with a pick in a late round because I think they have
Mhm.
a lot of focus down there in the late rounds, or they will. They haven't announced the comp picks yet. So they should have some opportunities to do that if they want to. I really didn't like it when they started their overdrafts in the 5th round during the COVID year, and they ended up with Ben Mason, for example, used as one of those
Uh,
selections. Just an awful
yeah.
selection.
Yeah. I, I I think it was two practices in the training camp. I started calling them former Ravens draft pick Ben Mason.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's move on and talk about Travis Jones.
Okay.
Increased his playing time significantly between 23 and 24. He was at 38.9% of the snaps and jumped to 57.6, which should be a 50% increase in snaps. I guess the Ravens played less snaps, which doesn't really make sense to me. But I looked at the actual number of snaps increase. It was a 31% increase in snaps by number. I'm going to have to look at that and make sure there's not a problem in my spreadsheet looking at the percentages there. But 31% increase in snaps, anyways, a big increase in playing time between year 2 and 3 for Jones.
Yeah. And he has earned that additional playing time, just being an absolute force in the middle. He's probably the most violent hitter on the team.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think in the Bills game, that he took when after Van Noy strip sacked him on the flea flicker that they tried. I mean, I was impressed that Josh Allen even got up because that hurt my ribs the way he hits. And
Yeah.
and I mean yeah,
I was saying no flag,
he's
no flag, no flag.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's really always been an excellent run defender. Last year, he just really started to, especially the second half of last year, became just absolutely necessary for you to double team him on runs, and he's continued that over to this year, and it's been absolutely necessary to double team him on pass situations as well as run situations. So he is a guy that I think you are absolutely looking to re-sign this offseason. Um, I was looking on Over the Cap, and they have his valuation at 7 million. I was like, boy,
You
that'd
get
be a
him for that.
no-brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
That
I
would,
mean,
I don't
yeah.
think his agent would let him sign for that.
No, I would say I would be happy with a 3 year, 35-40 million dollar contract, something like that. But it, maybe even maybe even as much as 15 a year. But yeah, something
If,
around that range.
yeah, I think if they're getting him a year early, if if it was an extension for 3 years for 35, I'd be happy with it.
Mhm.
If it were, yeah, and I'd even go a little higher, 30, 39, say. That's 13 million a year. It's not doesn't start until 25. If there's an extension of that type that gives them some signing bonus now,
Mhm.
no problem. That's exactly the kind of deal the Ravens should be looking to make. And maybe it even come in a little cheaper. Maybe
Yeah.
10 million is what could be tacked onto this contract. They did get a very good price on Broderick Washington under these same circumstances. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
quality does
Hasn't
matter.
worked out.
Yeah.
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 Hmm. Yeah. I think Jones has been a much better player than what the best of Broderick Washington was.
Yes.
Even yeah. So yeah.
Broderick is the poster child for having the right season at the right time to have that early extension, and he's kind
Hmm.
of Brandon Stevens on the Ravens since then. Meaning
Yeah.
the Ravens didn't sign Stevens after 3 years, but they did sign Washington, and they really
Right.
needed to. They really needed to kind of collect the defensive linemen because none of them were signed, and they were they're thinking they might lose Matabike, and Pierce was walking again, and then they re-signed Pierce before the year ended, and they got everybody back. It's just
Hmm.
Washington wasn't the player they really hoped he was, and we'll talk about him in a minute. So I want to say
Yeah.
a couple other things about Jones. Um, his injuries at midseason really hurt the Ravens pass rush. You could see how much the Ravens pass rush was suffering with
Hmm.
him being hurt. Look to me, Brandon, is like he basically is having a lot of lower leg pain where his ability to play was just all in his hands. He wasn't really using his feet in the way that we see him do
Right.
typically.
Right. Yeah. He is a power rusher, and that power is generated from kind of the waist down to his legs. Like he really churns those legs and is pushing a lot with his legs. I mean, and so if you can't push off on that ankle, I mean, I don't know if it was for sure an ankle. It might have even been a calf injury.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a calf injury, it makes it virtually impossible to be able to really drive with your legs. And he's so yeah, like you could really tell the difference that he was hurting, and it was literally kind of the entire pass rush was going down those 4 or 5 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, and even when he came back, he wasn't completely healthy again, and it took a while. It really took a while for the Tampa Bay game, where the Ravens I believe they had 5 for that game, which was really fortunate. But then they had 2 guys hurt, and they didn't even have enough linemen to finish the game. Really, I mean they were having to try to do all sorts of things to get the game finished, including playing Travis Jones when he was hurt. And
Mhm.
that was really unfortunate. He wasn't as good. I think he played about 15 snaps in that game, but they ended up going pretty much. I think Washington was their only. Might have been Washington and Matabike were the guys playing almost every single snap at that point in
Mhm.
that game.
Yeah.
All right, Jones, I would say needs to improve his missed tackle rate a little bit. It was at 10.4%. It's one of the highest of the Ravens linemen, not quite the highest. We'll get to that. But I don't see any significant change in 2025 usage for him. Hopefully, he'll be healthy again. I think he'll be the dominant player. I think they'll play him with Matabike. What would you think? Any changes that you would see for him?
No, I think you try to get, if this ends up being his last season with the Ravens, I think you try to get as much as you can out of him.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he is really an underrated uh, defensive lineman and really a force on inside. So keep using him at this rate, if and even increase his usage if possible, without trying to limit his effectiveness. But he you want him on the field as much as possible because he really is one of those guys that just you have to double team or else you're at a serious disadvantage.
Mike Tomlin always used to say the same thing about Elodie Nada. You had to worry about getting
Hmm.
him blocked up in the middle and then work out from there. And I
Hmm.
think that most teams are looking at Jones that way. All right, let's move on. Talk a little bit about Brent Urban, who incredibly 11 years now in the league. This will be year number 12 coming up. He's a 2014 draftee. Played 19.4% of the team snaps in 2024. Is down from almost 25% in 23. He primarily plays as a 5-tech. So you mentioned the two pairings earlier that it's usually this year had been Pearson Washington, occasionally Pearson Urban, but Pearson Washington most of the time, and
Hmm.
um, Namdi and Travis playing
Travis.
together.
Yeah.
But this um, Urban is a guy who always basically is in there in the base defense. So when they had 3 defensive linemen on the field, he's always a 5-tech. Brent was on the show a while back. It's now been a couple of years, but we talked about the 5-tech position kind of being dying, and he thought, well, he was biased, but he really saw a need for it, and having different body
Hmm.
types to defend the run is useful. He's done extremely well with the opportunities given.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's still very good at knocking down passes, getting into passing lanes, when they're in base, and he's still a solid run defender. He can set the edge when needed, or just be that 5-tech, kind of blocking a tackle, holding up a tackle, being a stout run defender there. So yeah, he's one of those glue guys that he's never going to get the highlight plays. He's never going to get the big coverage, but he's a guy that is just a steady presence on the defensive line and gives you quality snaps.
Okay. Um, Manages that space very well. That's certainly what he does. One of the things he does exceptionally well. There's probably nobody who's better in terms of run fundamentals than Urban. He really understands what he's trying to do with that. And almost more than any other player, he really is not trying to make the tackles himself. He's trying to set up other people, really
Hmm.
deny space and create opportunity for other players more than that. Now,
Hmm.
I don't know that linemen ever really consider themselves selfish for trying to make a tackle, or your first job is really to deny space and to create a gap, to penetrate, do all those things we talked about earlier. Um, is there anything that they teach you about that as a defensive lineman, that you're being selfish to try and make a tackle?
It only if you're sacrificing the integrity of the defense. So if you're shooting the wrong gap, or you're supposed to take on a double team and you let one of the guys go or something like that to try to make the play, boy, you better make that play or you're getting cursed out by a coach. So yeah, it's important to make your plays within the scheme of the defense. So if the penetration or something like that, and it allows you to make that tackle, go ahead and you make that tackle. Otherwise, don't don't do something else. Yeah.
Can you relativize the importance or the discredit given for say a safety versus a defensive line in terms of integrity of responsibility? Is it more at safety, or do you think it's every bit as much at defensive line?
So in I would say with defensive line, your your integrity really, if you're playing a team defense and a team defensive concept, you need all 11 players to have their responsibility on a play, and potentially if any one of those 11 doesn't do their job, it can result in a big play. So I think in a run situation, a defensive line not doing their responsibility is can be much more damaging than a safety kind of coming up. But because the safety, their responsibility is probably, they're either in the force situation where, they're coming up to force an outside run inside or something like that. They're
Mhm.
not necessarily supposed to make they're trying to make the tackle, but their more responsibility is to keep the running back inside and not getting to the edge and turning the corner. A defensive lineman kind of making a play, you're opening up a gap and you're opening up a hole where probably nobody is able to cover behind you if you know shoot the wrong gap or let a lineman go that you're supposed to be taking on. You're potentially opening up a huge hole where nobody's accounting for, and that can result in a big play.
When you played, how critical was it for linemen, or were you graded or reviewed in some way for how you were holding your double team and preventing one of the two from comboing up? I'll use that verb that way to level two to make a block. How critical is it for you to make life difficult on those two blockers that are doubling you in order to make
Mhm.
sure that one of them cannot move up easily?
So you're not really graded, but they teach you technique, and you go play to play, and they'll show you, okay, you did it really well this play. Continuing to do it this way. This play, I could tell, for whatever reason, it didn't work out, and they'll explain why and talk to you that way. But we didn't get graded play to play or have anything close to like what PFF had
That's
back then.
that's kind of a difference from some offensive linemen at the NFL level anyway, is that they often there's a 0 to 2 by halves grading system that's done for offensive linemen, which don't confuse it with the PFF. That's -2 to 2 or whatever. But the 0 to 2 grading is you get a 0, a half, a 1, a 1.5, or a 2 on blocks.
Mhm.
Um, that's something that I've heard offensive linemen talk about. And they also say that they don't like it when certain offensive linemen are grade grubbers with regard to it. They're so grade conscious that they
Mhm.
try and do it a certain way.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's always an issue that you have. Sometimes people are going for stats more or less. You can see it in basketball, you can see it in other sports, and you can see it like people are trying to get a good grade rather than doing what's best and what's most important for the team. Yeah.
All right. All right, let's get back to Urban a little bit. I thought one of the great things about his game, you mentioned earlier, is being in passing lanes. That doesn't necessarily mean he has to knock the ball down. Russell Wilson looked tremendously uncomfortable against the Ravens, and Urban wasn't in for a ton of snaps, so it's not all Urban. It's any human that's 6'2" or higher is probably making Russell Wilson very uncomfortable. But he has to move around and be shifty in the pocket immediately, where you hope your quarterback was a little more still and able to read the field, or at least if your quarterback is not a mobility guy, he's a true pocket passer, you probably want him to have his head still to read the field
Hmm.
better and to be able to get his throw off better. Russell Wilson has to be, back and forth just to even see a throwing lane.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Urban 6'6", 6'7". I mean,
Yeah.
that's a tall guy. If you're looking at a short, quick 3-step pass, really a short guy like Wilson, it's really hard to look over him and look past him. But I mean, even a taller quarterback. I mean, Urban 6'6", 6'7". He's probably 6'9" with a helmet on. So that's hard to look around.
Yeah. Okay, so Brent in 22 and 23 is a handshake guy that provides additional fungible roster space at the end for guys that are going on IR but might be DTR. So they put them on the roster, then they put them IR the next day, then they re-sign Urban. That's what I mean by being a handshake guy. There are relatively few players on the Ravens who obviously meet that characteristic going forward. So players like Urban, if they can really do something for you, and maybe a Chris Board or something would be in that category next year, or maybe not. Maybe he's too good to consider for that. But they have to have some of those at the edge of the roster in order to get the effective 55 or 56 man roster instead of just 53.
Right, exactly. Yeah. The value in these 1 year vet minimum guys, that's part of their value is being able to cut them, and just have, a younger player either go to IR or whatever to in order and then bring back that veteran. That's just added value for a player. Yeah.
Percentage chance he'll be back in 25.
Um,
Okay, I wrote
I
my
think,
number down.
okay. I think it goes up if Pierce is indeed retires. I would say right now, I would say 30%. And if yeah, if Pierce retires, I think it might go up to 50, but
Mhm.
I right now I'd say 30.
Okay, I have him at 35, and I think
Okay.
I'll be. It's one of the off-season things I'll be very interested about hearing is are they planning to bring him back or not? I do anticipate at least he's earned a camp invite, but he may also be at a point in his life where he's ready to hang him up. I
Right.
couldn't tell you. Broderick Washington, let's talk fairly briefly about him since we've been on a
Mhm.
long time on this. Had a
Okay.
pretty modest 2024 season in a lot of ways. Missed tackle rate of 19.2% was his worst since his rookie year. He did have 2 batted passes. And Broderick Washington, once again, 006 batted passes in his third year, which led the team, was one of the highest totals in the league. And he gets signed at that point, and then he had 0 and then 2 batted passes since then. So his timing was outstanding in terms of getting his contract signed.
Right, exactly. Uh, he's gone from being a very solid, third or fourth defensive lineman to really almost kind of being a replacement level player at this point. Last year was a really bad year for him. Um, and this year it's been a slight improvement, but I mean, hasn't he hasn't shown this that he's been the same guy that he was in that third year after he signed his contract. So I you wonder, like, this happens to some guys. They got that money and now they might have lost their work ethic a little bit, or it might just be like you said earlier, some guys just choose, you know they they have the perfect timing and they strike while that iron is hot, and that's what he did. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fortunate for him, certainly. 18 defensive wins this last year. And he played 42.5% of the snaps. So it's not like he's taking a limited workload. The Ravens really needed him on the field for a lot of snaps this year. And when you look at 2.26 snaps per play, they have to get 45% on average from their top 5 linemen, or supplement that with those 85 Wormley and Tupou snaps, which is not very much. You, that's hard to do. I mean, they needed guys like Washington who could really play some significant time.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Just a
um
small cap savings if he's cut, only about 900,000.
right.
That wouldn't answer the question that he creates if he's gone.
Right, yeah, like I think I don't think it's 100% certainty that he'll be on the team in 25. I guess it'll depend how many linemen they draft. I think if they found 2 defensive linemen in like the 4th and 5th round that they really liked, I think the chances of him staying on really drops seriously. And I mean, I think possibly even if they were to sign a kind of a cheap veteran defensive lineman, I think his chances of being on the team drops also. So, um, I mean, he, I think definitely by the next year he
Yeah.
will probably not be on the team. But it's not 100% that he'll be on the team this year.
Yeah. 4.01 million in savings in 26 for a cut then. And that's exactly where I am with you. So
Yeah.
we saw Wormley and Tupou get that little bit of action, which I think we talked enough about for relative to its importance. In that, I will say, in that Denver game, Wormley, Tupou, Matabike, and Washington were the 4 active interior defensive linemen. If you're not scared about that situation, and by the way, I'm not sure, Travis Jones might have been active and not played, but they had only 4 guys who played in that game. Um,
Mhm.
Incredible. They won that game 41-10. Just incredible.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah. That was let the offense jump to a big lead, and hopefully we don't need our defensive linemen to stop the run later in the game. Just have our pass rushers, and fortunately, that's exactly what happened there. Yeah.
Yeah, it worked out. Denver's got a pretty good offensive line too, particularly on that left side.
Hmm.
I would have thought they'd provide more of a challenge than they did.
Hmm.
So let's talk in general needs for this offseason. What you start? What's the Ravens' number one need in terms of how they address the defensive line?
I think number one, I think you really just want to find somebody, uh, a big stout defensive lineman. Kind of, they found Travis Jones in the third round. Finding somebody like that, I think, is probably more important to find than maybe a penetrating three gap guy like Matabike. Um, I mean, obviously, if you think somebody's going to be as good as Matabike, you draft him. But
Yeah,
I think the more immediate need is to find more of a run stuffing space eater like Jones or Pierce is. And I mean, you can find guys like that, later in the rounds. I mean, if they're strictly kind of run stuffing defensive tackles, you can find those guys fifth, sixth, seventh round, or even UDFA guys. If but if you can have a guy that kind of does both, like Travis Jones, if you could find a clone like that in the third round or fourth round, absolutely grab that immediately.
be the most obvious draft pick in Ravens history if they got another Travis Jones opportunity out
Hmm.
of that.
Yeah.
Um, with you completely. Great history with UDFA's here, so I don't have a problem if that's the way they want to go. If they think they know a guy, there were some people in the Ben Mason draft pick. Defensive line was where I was hoping that pick was going to go. Didn't think they needed
Hmm.
to draft Mason at all to get him. And Tonga and some other guys were available towards the end of the draft that would have been, better than UDFA's. I think they ended up being drafted in round 6 or 7. That would have been guys who would have made sense for the Ravens and maybe worked out better, frankly, in the Ravens system. But then I
Hmm.
say that, the guy who's worked out amazingly well and was just named the Dolphins MVP this year, Zach Sealer.
Yeah, yeah. Boy, I mean, I, I mean, he's a really solid player,
Mhm.
both against the run and the pass. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I think he had more sacks than Matabike this year, and uh, he didn't flash that kind of ability when he was with us, and it, good for him to really kind of improve as a player and become that kind of borderline Pro Bowl player that he is. And but yeah, I think our search is now to find that next guy though.
Yeah, absolutely. Limited chance of a UFA from the outside. Would you agree? And if it is, it's probably going to be a pretty cheap guy.
Yeah, I think like if they're going to find somebody, it's going to be, yeah, vet minimum or right near at the bottom. I would be surprised if it's somebody like Calais Campbell, even like on a
Sure.
$3 or $4 million deal. But I mean, certainly I'd love to have Calais back, for one more year. But um, I think if they go the veteran route, it's going to be a guy that's at or close to the vet minimum.
Mhm. Yeah, that would have been a great signing if they could have done it this year. Brandon,
Mhm.
always a pleasure doing any football conversation with you. Thanks so much for coming on. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online if they want.
Sure. I'm on Twitter, and I can't even think of my Twitter handle.
B Croxton 99.
B B99, and love to talk football, and I also season ticket holder. So yeah, love the Ravens. Love talking football.
All right. Outstanding, Brandon. Other folks out there, and tag him in to things, particularly if you're talking about anything about offensive or defensive line play. And I'm sure he'll have some very interesting things to say based on his background. Other folks out there, thanks for your support of the show in general. Appreciate contributions to hashtag Film Study Mailbag as we go through this position review series. Just hit them up. I'll try and get them onto the right show. So Friday Morning GM is on hiatus for a little bit until we have some activity around the UFAs and whatnot. So the position review show is one of the best places to get in your question. Otherwise, thanks for your support. Please like and subscribe if you're listening or watching this on YouTube. And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.